Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Unfiltered Founders Book Club, first ever book review. I'm Adam Lehrhaupt here with Keith Krem, and we're going to be talking today about the book Unreasonable Hospitality. We picked this book because it offers a lot of valuable lessons on leadership, good culture, customer experience. And in this book, Will Guidara, is that how you pronounce that,
I
Keith?
believe so, yeah.
So in this book, Will Guidara often talks about how hospitality is a dialogue and not a monologue. So when you're talking about this book, Keith, how do you define unreasonable hospitality in your own words? And what is kind of one small unreasonable gesture that you've seen companies execute that fundamentally changes your perception?
I mean, I think unreasonable hospitality to me, in my own words, is obviously that basic concept of just being willing to go the extra mile, right? It's when you think that something is good enough and then going beyond that, right? And saying, listen, like we can have our business be good, but we want our business to be great. And so the inner coach in me is always kind of relays that back to sports, obviously, that, there's a difference between a good team and a great team. And it's the simple things of what can you do to take yourself that extra mile. And, in the case of kind of how he outlines it and where my viewpoint is on that, 95, this the part that separates, the good from great, or the great from good rather, right, is that extra 2, 3, 4, 5%. It's not this drastic margin, right? It's this little bit extra that makes that difference between great and good. And I think, looking at personal experiences from us, in terms of the companies I've experienced, but even one that I run, when we look at my food service company, Kremers, one of the things we used to do and still look at doing is we would have one of our guys go in and be a chef, right, inside the classrooms. And he would go and, do a fruits and vegetable walkthrough with the kids and the whole deal. And we didn't, we weren't getting paid to do that. Our core proficiency was to serve school food ultimately and get food there safely and have it be of a high quality. But that little extra bit as the food service company to get kids more trusting of their fruits and vegetables was something that we could do that, made us special, even as a small company.
Yeah, and when I think about this, and I just traveled over the weekend, and I got a survey from the hotel I stayed at, and their request was, is this a 10? And I had to think about that because when you think about taking a survey, and anybody who has a job that is associated with doing surveys, if you don't get a 5 out of 5 or a 10 out of 10, it might as well be a 1 or a 0 because that's the way that people interpret surveys. But in reality, a 10 for me as a customer has to be that extra step. Like, what did they do that went above and beyond? So when I go somewhere, I don't immediately say, all right, you're at a 10 right now. If you do one thing wrong, you're going down to a 9. I say, all right, we're starting at a 5 or a 6. You start in the middle and you say, okay, we're in the middle. If you do a couple of good things, I'm going to bump you up. If you don't do anything, I'm not going to give you a 4, but you don't just automatically start at 10. And I think that extra little bit, that extra thing that people do is what gets you over that 8, 9 and gets you to that 10 and really makes your business something that people want to talk about and advocate for.
Yeah, and I think, it's about not getting confused that it's just doing something for free. Like that's not the right way to approach it. Whereas I'm giving them extra for free. It's not that extra free thing. And in some cases, maybe it can be, but I think it's about the detail. It's about noticing, the details that may exist for that unique customer to make them feel special, right? In whatever service you're providing, to make them have that special moment, that special connection with you and your business. You get that connection. I think that that's the more impactful way to get to that higher level, not necessarily just saying, well, I'm going to give out a free goodie to everybody. Well, that's kind of missing the mark in terms of what we're talking about.
Yeah, yeah. And so in this book, he talks about balancing excellence, which he describes as the technical delivery of the product
Mhm.
with hospitality, like how you make people feel. So as a founder, how do we manage that tension in a business, right? How do we balance those things? And which of those two do you think should be prioritized first? Or is it, I mean, my feeling we'll get to in a second, but which ones do you prioritize first?
I mean, I think you prioritize the feeling, first, right? Ultimately, I think that's the biggest takeaway. And I think that making, goes full circle. Having somebody feel good when they walk in and walk out of your place of business, having somebody feel that you've been impactful, you can make mistakes along the way and still have somebody feel great about your business, right? And I think that's the biggest thing there is that you prioritize that hospitality element up front versus just kind of the service. And you hit it there. Like, execution can become very mundane, right? Where this is what we do in the whole deal, and you want to keep that level and you want to keep that standard, but I think ultimately you prioritize the feeling.
So I agree with that to some extent. I think that there are some situational things.
Hmm.
For instance, you know, your customers. I mean, if you open a business and you don't know your customers, then you've already started off on the wrong foot.
Correct.
But there are some people who want that kind of, here you go, boom, 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 get me in, get me out. That's all they care about, right? So if you have that kind of business, that kind of, you're two different kinds of coffee shops. One coffee shop is come, sit down, relax, put your feet up, listen to some music. We got to have, live bands here a couple times a week. We're going to draw people in and have you stay. And then there's the other one where it's busy people who want to grab a coffee and go and get them in, get them out. So I think in that instance, that excellence, that focus on excellence first leads to the hospitality,
Yeah, but I
right?
think
So
yeah, I do. I agree with that, but I think it could also go hand in hand, right? Because it's the little details of knowing the name of the person that you're giving that coffee to, not allowing them to come into your place of business 10 days, 12 days, 15 days, 20 days, months, right? And not knowing the basic, information such as their name. And I think that being able to interact in that moment allows you, and then, more so if they're regular, right? Saying not only do you have it ready, but, people are people of habit. So that guy shows up and Mike shows up at 8:01 every single day and he gets the same coffee. His coffee's ready at 8 o'clock and he comes in and it's there and you're counting on him being there, right? And yeah, there might be the day or two that Mike doesn't show up and you burn a cup of coffee that goes down the drain, but it's worth it having that ready for him and that experience because you're giving him that mix of both. And so I think it is the combination. To your point, execution matters without saying, but under the assumption that you are executing on your business at a minimum level, there's a lot of things that you can do that can become really special and make that experience and that feeling, that they're never going to go get a cup of coffee anywhere else because right? They know when they walk in your place of business that not only are you going to get it right, but that you're going to have it ready for them and you are going to be the quickest cup of coffee and you're going to get to say hello to somebody and you're going to have somebody greet you to start your day, by name and, wish you good luck. And that goes a long way.
yeah, and like if the person who always gets the same sesame seed bagel every single morning, while your regular person doesn't have sesame seed bagels, you can find sesame seed bagels
Yeah.
somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Just make sure you have that. You need five of them for this person every week,
I
right?
mean
So
I mean, have you changed your breakfast? You changed your hair up a little bit, but have you changed your breakfast at all? Because
dude,
you're
this is the first recording with the new hairstyle.
there you go. Well, you are a habit breakfast guy, right? You eat the
I
same
I
thing.
am. I do the same thing every time. Like even to the point where I go to breakfast with friends on the weekends and I changed the bread one time and it came out with my regular bread. Like I heard they had sourdough instead of rye. I was like, "Ooh, I'll try the sourdough today." And
Yeah.
my rye bread came out just because the waitress is so used to writing rye, even though I said sourdough. It's like, and like same thing we talk about with the business as a customer. I'm not going to point that out,
No.
right? Like
No,
I
because
like to, I go to this business all the time. You
yep.
have to be a good customer, just like you have to be a good business owner, because people will remember if you're the person who bitches about their bread all the time,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
If
and
you
and if
if you eat the same thing every
yeah, and if
single
you look at
time,
that though, you're willing to actually that's an prime example of a failure to execute, right? But because they prioritize all the other stuff for you and they know you and you're the regular and all those things, you're going to ignore that
yeah,
bad day, so to speak, not even a bad day. You're going to
it's
ignore
a
the fact that they
misstep.
got the
Yeah,
bread
it's a
wrong.
simple misstep,
A
right?
simple misstep and you're willing to overlook that doesn't impact your feeling, doesn't impact anything else. Like actually you get a little bit of a chuckle out of it, right? I think it definitely is a mixture, but great question in terms of how you balance it or which one do you prioritize, first.
Yeah.
And I think you have to get to a minimum standard of execution, but once you get there, you should start injecting, right, those elements of how can I make this special? And, even on the people that are the dry cleaning business and you're not, that again, people are in and out and they just want their stuff and like the whole deal. There are little things that you can do, little touches that you can put in play that go a long way.
So Kadar, I'm going to call him the author.
The author.
I'm sorry, Will.
Will, let's just use Will. How
Will.
about that?
So
Yeah.
Will, yeah, we're
So
taking a
Will.
personal thing. Like I
Yeah.
feel like I know him.
Yeah.
So Will talks about empowering every employee with something that he calls being a dream weaver or
Mhm.
taking ownership of the guest experience. What concrete steps have you taken to empower your team personally? Or kind of what rules do you put around where to allow them to break the rules or going off script in pursuit of, unreasonable hospitality?
I mean, I think the biggest thing that we try to preach more than anything, especially because, a lot of the businesses I run, there's offsite elements. They're not coming in necessarily. The ice rink most certainly, which we can talk about. And, we prioritize cleanliness. We prioritize, hey, we got it for you. We prioritize being responsive when something occurs, breaks, whatever, like we're on it. We don't wait, and it's about jumping to action right away. But I think on the other ones, it's about giving them the power to problem solve, and to provide solutions. And, so preaching, look, like I'd rather you come up with a solution in the moment, and solve it for the customer than, basically say, hey, I have to make a phone call. Now, is that in every case? No, there's going to be some big things that happen. But on terms of the small stuff, look, you're out on the road, you're on site, you're there. If there is a problem that pops up, you are the face and service, fix it, right? Fix it in the moment and be empowered to go and fix it. And if it's not the right solution that I would have had in play, then that's fine. We could talk about it on the backside, but at least the customer had a solution. And it even just makes the conversations easier in terms of some of those moments where execution does fail, because at least there was a solution that was put in place, and which is better than just scrambling and saying, I don't have the power to fix this for you. Right. That's a terrible answer from a customer standpoint. And then I think, more than anything, we do a lot of recurring business. And so it is about getting to know their customers. We don't want to get them to go in and not understand their customers, and little things like birthdays and just knowing when events happen, and all of that adds up a long way. But I think empowering people to be problem solvers goes a long way. Empowering people to have that flexibility, that if they know that there's something extra that teacher wants, it goes a long way, right? And so it could be as small, especially where we're dealing on the school food front. It could be as small as just making sure that the food goes on a certain cart a certain way and all of that. And, we can work around that, right? There's ways that we can work and be flexible within our process to make sure that the food gets to where it's supposed to be. And though that may not be in the contract, and though that may not be right in the exact way, ultimately, if that helps that teacher and helps them navigate their day, we want to do that.
Yeah, and he talks about this. I'm going to use kind of like his words, where he talks about like intentionality, right? So, like any decision. So, if you're going to go off script, any decision, whether obvious or mundane, kind of has to align with the overall vision. So, if you're going to go, off script, going to break a rule, but it aligns with the overall vision and that pathway, that intentionality is there, right?
Mhm.
So there's kind of a reasoning behind the vision, and the rules and the structure is kind of just to kind of give guide rails. But sometimes to do that vision, we as founders understand you have to change it up a little bit. Sometimes you have to go outside the lines, color outside the lines in order to make the picture better. So with that in mind, like when you're thinking about startups or scaling a startup, what are typical like mundane but critical details that you think a founder should try to be really fiercely intentional about? For me, it's like, yeah, you need to have a bank account, but you need to be really intentional about what bank you're going to use, right? Because each bank is structured differently, and the way that they handle accounts is different. And, like it's a
For
very
sure.
simple thing. Like I use such and such a bank. Well, that might not be the best bank for a business. right? And the
Yep.
account that you open for a business is different. It's a mundane thing, but it's something that if you do it right is going to help you in a very, very concrete way. So what are some of those little things that you think get overlooked?
In terms of startup, I mean, and again, in terms of focusing on this, I think ironically, we talk a lot about target customer and we talk about knowing your customer, et cetera, right? I don't think that, I think it's very easy to just say, hey, I'm gonna start XYZ business and this is, these are my core proficiencies and we're gonna provide a service. And then, not looking at the fact that like there are elements that can make you truly, truly special. There are little things that you can add in that can make you truly special from day one, and not going over the top on it, but having those little touches that are there, and then focusing in every part of the chain, the service elements, and not just service to the customer, but service to yourself. To your point, like the bank example is great, and in terms of how do checks get deposited? Do they hold them for 2 or 3 days? Are you going to have the cash flow? Are you going to be able to move things the way that you want? What are your credit card processing fees? There's a big difference between 2.5 and 3%. How do your credit cards hit? Do they hit right away, in 24 hours, or are they 48 to 72 hours? Those types of things, those little details, anything that can make service, so as much as we're talking about service to the customer special, that's great. But anything that can make service to you easier, ultimately, you should take a look at, right? And say, look, to your point, is this the best path of least resistance for me to get there? Doesn't mean cutting corners, right? I think that's where you ultimately want it to meet, is service to the customer and service to yourself. The better that you are and the more seamless that you are and all of those kind of things that you set up ultimately will translate into better service for the customer, who is the end user. So, I think to answer your question, as much as we're talking about service to the customer, I think it's about looking at every part of it and saying, am I servicing myself as the head of this business? Is this the easiest way for me? Is this the best way for me? And if not, the only thing that would trump that is there's some huge benefit to my customer that I'm doing it this way, right? And you can use food. I mean, food's a classic example, right? But, am I using canned sauce or am I making my own sauce, right? Well, what's the benefit to my customer in doing that? And if my something homemade sauce is the key staple in the whole deal, I can't just because it's easy to make, do canned sauce. I can't switch my homemade sauce to canned sauce, right? Because the benefit to my customer, the end user, right, is obviously how much they enjoy that homemade sauce, right? So I think it's about finding that where they match, but too often, we get lost in kind of that servicing, yourself in terms of saying, listen, am I giving myself good customer service with who I'm choosing to work with so that I can ultimately provide better customer service to the end user?
And that goes with the last two things that I want to talk about.
Mhm.
He talks about a famous story of the 11 Madison Park team serving a hot dog to a table of fine dining guests. And this really illustrates kind of what you're talking about, right?
Mhm.
The biggest impact isn't always tied to the highest cost item, right? It's about giving that customer what they want, right? Can you tell us a little bit, like, better explain this story a little bit and talk about how that low cost, high impact gesture to delight your customer is something that we try to teach?
Yeah, I mean, I think the story relates to that if you go to New York, you got to get a hot dog, and out of the old hot dog stand there. And I mean, anybody that we only live, an hour and a half outside the city, and you and I go in there all the time, and it's just one of those things that you gotta do, right? You gotta have that experience. And so first time in New York, family hadn't gotten to try that, and even though they were in a one of Will's fine dining establishments, that doesn't serve those. They were lamenting, and one of their dream weavers, so to speak, picked up on that. And even though they don't serve those New York hot dogs at that restaurant, right, the staff went out of their way to make sure that they served one up that day for them, and that ultimately that family got that experience. And that speaks to most certainly kind of the prime example of those little touches that could go there. And, it costs them out of pocket to go get that hot dog and to do all those other things. But the emotional attachment that family got out of doing that, it was huge. And I think, I'll share a hot dog story from our own experience, but we did a catering job, many years ago, 10 years ago, probably 10 years plus ago, on the Delaware River. And it was a really neat house, summer, hot. And, everybody's, having drinks and we're cooking and the whole deal. When we're on the top of a hill and then you go down the hill and the river's there and there's just tons of people that are out in the river. They're on rafts and they're tied up and like the whole deal. And so we were ready. We were ready for lunch, and people were not wanting to get out of the river. So me and some members of my staff, we took trays of hot dogs and hamburgers and condiments, and we took the shoes off and walked out in the middle of the river and started serving up hot dogs and hamburgers to people on the rafts, and said, "Look, we're you don't need to get out of the river today. It's hot, and we're all the way at the top of that hill, and we're gonna find a way to get you fed here in the river." And we started running plates and the whole deal, and we got to cool off a little bit too by getting in the river. But that made a lot of fans for us in terms of the catering experience, because where else had they been where they got to lounge up and stay in the rafts and really get kind of butlered, hot dogs and hamburgers right to them. I mean, that was a pretty special moment for us. And, most certainly going that extra mile was worth it. We got a recurring catering job out of it. We got a lot of referral business. Everybody that we were talking to, where normally they would kind of come to the line and grab their hot dog and hamburger. It wasn't that anymore, right? We're walking up to them in the river, we're having discussions, and you're getting to talk to people. And I was really proud of my staff for stepping up and willing to get their feet wet, so to speak, literally and figuratively.
So that's kind of our delve into this book. For those of you who aren't aware, this book is written by the guy that is the basis for the TV show The Bear. He's an executive producer there. So it's kind of a very well-known story now. It's a very well-known book, but it's got a lot of really cool things for people. Keith, is there anything that we left out that you think should be?
No, I mean, I think that, he's got his 95-5 rule, which is, 95%, right, is focused on correct and efficient service, but 5%, that hospitality difference is what makes, and I think it goes back to good and great. If you want to be good, execute and do your basics. But if you want to be great, focus on that extra 5%. It's not an extra 20 or 25 or 30% that you have to put in, but those small little elements can add up a long way, in terms of really proving out that your business is different from the next guy.
Yeah, and he's not saying go up, do 110%.
No.
He's being realistic. Like 95% of what you do is good enough, but focusing on that extra 5%, like that thing that really pushes you over the top and gets you from, a 9 to a 10 is really what's going to set you apart from everybody else and make you a business of people that not just come back to, but advocate for.
Yeah. And that's the biggest thing. It's one thing when they keep coming back, but when they start bringing friends, that's huge. And, it's hard. Every negative experience somebody has, they're going to tell, 8 to 10 people, but every positive experience they have, they're only going to tell 1 to 3. That's the old marketing adage. So the numbers are not in your favor when it goes the other direction, but when you can get those positives, those 1 to 3 do start adding up and multiplying. Very much like compounding interest. You want to give that little bit extra if you can.
Cool. Well, that brings us to the end of our first ever book club. Thank everybody for being a part of what we're doing here. If you have questions, comments, thoughts, comment them below. As always, we are Unfiltered founders. This has not been a drinking experience.
No, but it can be. It can be next time.
It can be. Yeah. There you go. Because it doesn't always have to be about drinking, right? It could just be about the good stuff.